Captain Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the Starbound, watching the endless stars through the main screen. The ship had been patrolling this part of space for 3 months now. It was quiet work, but someone had to keep watch at the edge of human territory. The Kepler 442 system was one of the last stops before entering completely unknown space. "Captain, we're picking up something strange," called out Lieutenant Sam Parker from her station. She was the ship's science officer, fresh out of the academy but sharp as they came. Her fingers moved quickly over her controls as she tried to make sense of what her sensors were telling her. Jake walked over to her station. "What kind of strange?" "There's a ship out there, sir, but it's not like anything in our database. The design is completely different from human ships or any of the alien vessels we've encountered before." Commander Ben Taylor, the ship's security chief, looked up from his own station. "How big are we talking?" Sam checked her readings again. "About twice our size, but the strange thing is how it's built. The hull looks like it's made of some kind of crystal or glass. It's beautiful, actually, like someone carved a spaceship out of a giant diamond." Jake felt his pulse quicken. First contact situations were rare, and each one could change everything. "Are they sending any signals?" "Yes, sir. They just started transmitting. It's coming through on multiple frequencies. Our computers are working on translation now." The bridge fell silent as everyone waited. The Starbound carried 200 crew members, all of them depending on Jake to make the right decisions. He had trained for moments like this, but actually, facing an unknown alien species was different from running simulations. "Translation complete, Captain," announced the communications officer, Ensign Mike Chen. "They're requesting permission to speak with our leader. They say they come in peace and want to discuss something called Evaluation for Galactic Inclusion." Jake exchanged glances with Ben. Those words could mean anything, and not all of them were good. "Put them through." The main screen changed from the star field to show the interior of the alien ship. Jake had seen pictures of various alien species before, but these beings were unlike anything he had encountered. They were tall and thin, with skin so pale it was almost see-through. Their eyes were large and seemed to glow with a soft blue light. Everything about them looked delicate, like they might break if someone spoke too loudly. The alien in the center of the group stepped forward. When he spoke, his voice was smooth and somehow musical. "Greetings, humans of the vessel Starbound. I am Ambassador Keth Zarhai of the Valoran Empire. We have come a long way to meet your species." "Welcome, Ambassador," Jake replied, trying to keep his voice steady. "I'm Captain Jake Morrison. We're honored by your visit." The ambassador nodded, slowly. "Your species has caught our attention, Captain Morrison. We have been watching your expansion into space with interest. You have achieved much in a short time." Sam whispered something to Jake about energy readings from their ship, but he held up a hand to silence her. He needed to focus on this conversation. "We represent an empire that has existed for over 10,000 of your years," the ambassador continued. "In that time, we have encountered many species. Some have joined us willingly. Others have required more persuasion." Ben shifted uncomfortably at his station. Jake could feel the tension building on the bridge. "We are here to offer your species a choice," Ambassador Zarhai said. "Submit to evaluation and perhaps earn a place in our galactic order, refuse, and remain isolated at the edge of civilized space." Jake kept his expression neutral, but inside he was thinking fast. This sounded like the kind of offer that wasn't really a choice at all. What exactly does this evaluation involve? "There are trials," the ambassador explained. "Tests of your technological capabilities, your cultural development, and your biological fitness. Most species find them quite challenging." Another alien stepped forward, this one wearing what looked like military insignia. "I am General Thex Koldai. In our experience, few species pass all the trials on their first attempt. This is nothing to be ashamed of. The trials are designed to be difficult." Jake noticed something strange about both aliens. They seemed to be standing in areas of their ship that were much dimmer than the rest. The lighting around them was soft and filtered, nothing like the bright lights humans preferred. "Captain," Sam whispered urgently, Their ship is putting out massive amounts of electromagnetic energy. I think it's all going to environmental controls. They're working really hard to maintain specific conditions over there." Jake nodded slightly to show he had heard her. "Ambassador, would it be possible for us to meet in person? Perhaps we could arrange a meeting at the space station in this system." The ambassador and the general exchanged looks. "That would be acceptable, provided proper environmental controls can be established. We require very specific lighting conditions to survive. Direct exposure to most stellar radiation is lethal to our species within minutes." "Of course," Jake agreed. "We'll make sure you're comfortable." After the transmission ended, Jake turned to his crew. The bridge was buzzing with quiet conversation as everyone tried to process what they had just witnessed. "Ben, what's your read on this situation?" Jake asked. The security chief rubbed his chin thoughtfully. "They're being polite, but there's definitely a threat underneath it all. This evaluation sounds like a test we're supposed to fail." Sam was still studying her sensor readings. "Captain, I think there's something important here. Did you notice how they talked about stellar radiation being lethal? And look at these energy readings from their ship. Almost all of their power is going to environmental systems. What are you thinking?" "I think these aliens are incredibly vulnerable to normal sunlight. They've had to build their entire civilization around avoiding it. That might explain why they're so technologically advanced in some areas, but it also might be a weakness." Jake looked back at the main screen, which now showed the beautiful crystal ship hanging in space. Something told him that the next few days would change everything for humanity. He just hoped they would change it for the better. "All right, people," he announced to the bridge crew. "Contact Earth Command and let them know what's happening, and start preparing for a formal first contact meeting. This is what we trained for." The meeting took place on Outpost 7, a small space station that orbited the fourth planet in the system. Jake had chosen this location because it was neutral ground and had the environmental controls needed to accommodate their alien guests. The station's commander, Colonel Mary Stevens, had worked all night to prepare special chambers with the filtered lighting the Valorans required. Jake arrived with a small team including Sam Parker, Ben Taylor, and Dr. Kevin Walsh, the ship's chief medical officer. They waited in the main conference room as the Valoran shuttle docked. Through the large windows, Jake could see their vessel up close for the first time. It really did look like it was carved from a single massive crystal, with smooth curves and surfaces that seemed to bend light in impossible ways. When the airlock opened, Ambassador Zarhai entered first, followed by several other Valorans. Jake noticed that they all wore what looked like protective clothing, and each carried a small device that projected a bubble of dim, filtered light around them. Even with all the station's environmental modifications, they were still taking extra precautions. "Captain Morrison," the ambassador said with a slight bow, "thank you for accommodating our needs. May I introduce High Researcher Veltar Marine, our chief scientist, and you have already met General Koldai." The scientist was even more pale than the others, if that was possible. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Your species is most interesting, Captain. We have studied your broadcasts and data transmissions. You have achieved spaceflight very quickly compared to most species. We're eager to learn from more experienced civilizations," Jake replied diplomatically. General Koldai stepped forward. "That brings us to why we are here. The Valoran Empire has a long tradition of helping younger species find their place in the galaxy. However, not all species are ready for the responsibilities that come with galactic citizenship." Ambassador Zarhai activated a holographic display in the center of the room. It showed what looked like a star map with hundreds of systems marked in different colors. The green systems represent worlds that have successfully joined our empire. The red ones represent species that were not ready. Jake noticed there were far more red systems than green ones. "What happened to the species that weren't ready?" "They remain under our protection," the ambassador explained. "We provide them with guidance and ensure they do not harm themselves or others. It is a kindness, really." Ben shifted in his chair. Jake could tell his security chief didn't like the sound of that at all. High Researcher Morin continued the explanation. "To determine readiness, we have developed a series of trials. These tests measure technological advancement, cultural sophistication, and biological resilience. They have been refined over thousands of years. The trials are challenging but fair, General Coldeye added. Most species require several attempts before they pass. Some never do. Sam leaned forward. What exactly do these trials involve? The Velerans exchanged glances before the ambassador answered. There are 3 primary tests. The first measures your technological capabilities. The second evaluates your cultural and social development. The third and final trial is called the Solar Endurance. Jake felt a chill run down his spine. Solar Endurance? Yes, the researcher said, her voice becoming even quieter. It involves direct exposure to stellar radiation for a predetermined period. This test measures the ultimate survival capability of a species. Dr. Walsh spoke up for the first time. How long is this exposure? 6 standard hours, General Coldeye replied. The test subject must remain in direct stellar radiation without artificial protection beyond basic clothing. Jake stared at them. And how many species have survived this test? The room fell silent. Ambassador Zarhai's glowing eyes dimmed slightly. In our 10,000-year history, no species has survived the solar endurance without advanced protective technology that takes centuries to develop. So it's impossible, Ben said bluntly. Not impossible, the ambassador corrected. Simply beyond the capabilities of most biological life. Stellar radiation causes immediate cellular damage and DNA breakdown. Death usually occurs within the first hour. Sam was taking notes on her data pad. But you said some species have joined your empire. How did they pass this test? They submitted to our authority before attempting the trial. High Researcher Morin explained. A wise choice that saved countless lives. Jake felt anger building inside him, but he kept his voice calm. So our choices are to submit to your rule or die trying to pass an impossible test. Captain, Ambassador Zarhai said, I understand your concern. But consider the alternative. Your species is expanding rapidly into space. Without proper guidance, you will encounter hostile forces that will show no mercy. We offer protection and wisdom gained over millennia. And in return, you would become a protected species under Valoran authority. Your worlds would be safe. Your people would be cared for, and you would be spared the dangers of independent existence in a hostile galaxy. Dr. Walsh looked puzzled. Ambassador, I'm curious about something. You mentioned that stellar radiation is lethal to most species, but humans spend time in sunlight regularly. We even do it for pleasure and health benefits. The Valorans stared at him as if he had said something incomprehensible. General Coldeye's translator device made several clicking sounds before producing words. This cannot be accurate. Direct stellar radiation exposure is universally fatal. Not for humans, Sam added. We've evolved on a planet with direct exposure to our star. Some humans spend hours in sunlight every day. High Researcher Morin activated her own scanning device and pointed it at the humans. The readings made her eyes glow brighter with what looked like excitement or alarm. Impossible. My instruments show that your cellular structure should not be able to withstand such exposure. Jake saw an opportunity. Perhaps your instruments are wrong. Or perhaps humans are different from the species you've encountered before. The ambassador looked genuinely confused. You claim your species can survive in direct stellar radiation? Not just survive, Dr. Walsh said with a slight smile. We actually need it for vitamin production and bone health. The Valorans began speaking among themselves in their own language. Their voices were rapid and urgent. Jake couldn't understand the words, but their body language suggested they were arguing about something important. Finally, Ambassador Zarhai turned back to the humans. If what you claim is true, it would be unprecedented. However, we cannot simply take your word for such an extraordinary claim. We understand, Jake replied. What do you propose? We will give you 24 hours to consider your options. Submit to our authority now or accept the solar endurance trial. If you somehow survive, your species will be welcomed as equals in our empire. After the Velerans left, Jake's team sat in stunned silence. "Captain," Sam finally said, "I think we might actually have a chance at this." "How do you figure that?" "They've never encountered a species like us. Every other race they've met evolved on worlds with heavy atmospheric filtering or underground. We're the first species they've found that actually thrives in direct sunlight." Ben nodded slowly. "It would explain their technology. They've had to develop incredible life support systems just to survive in space." Jake looked out the window at the distant star. For the first time since this meeting began, he felt something other than dread. He felt hope. Back aboard the Starbound, Jake called an emergency meeting with his senior staff. The conference room buzzed with nervous energy as everyone tried to understand what they had just learned. The choice the Valorans had given them was no choice at all. But maybe there was another way. "Let me get this straight," said Commander Ben Taylor, pacing back and forth. "These aliens want us to either become their slaves or die in their impossible test." "That's about right," Jake confirmed. But Dr. Walsh raised an interesting point during the meeting. They seemed genuinely shocked that humans can handle sunlight. Sam Parker had her data pad out and was reviewing all the sensor readings from their encounters with the Valorans. "Captain, I've been thinking about this. Every piece of technology on their ship is designed around avoiding stellar radiation. Their hull filters light. Their life support systems are incredibly complex and they can't even leave their ship without protective equipment." Dr. Walsh nodded. "I've been reviewing human biology textbooks since we got back. What's normal for us would be deadly for most life forms. Our skin produces melanin to protect us. We need vitamin D from sunlight, and we can actually get stronger from moderate sun exposure." Jake had already sent a message to Earth Command explaining the situation, but it would be hours before he got a response. In the meantime, he needed to make a decision that could affect all of humanity. "Sam, show me those biological scans you took of the Valorans." Sam activated the main screen and pulled up her data. "Look at this, Captain. Their cellular structure is completely different from ours. Their skin is so thin that UV radiation would penetrate directly to their organs. They have no natural protection at all." "It makes sense," Dr. Walsh added. "If their home planet had a thick atmosphere or if they evolved underground, they would never have developed resistance to radiation. For them, sunlight really is instant death." Ben stopped pacing and looked at the data. "So you're saying we might actually be able to survive their test?" "More than survive," Sam said excitedly. "We might be the first species they've ever met that doesn't need protection from stars." Jake felt a plan forming in his mind. "What would we need to make this work?" Dr. Walsh started making notes. "We'd need people who are used to sun exposure. Someone from a desert climate would be ideal. Also people with different skin types to show this isn't just limited to one group of humans." "I know just the person," Ben said. "Sergeant Amy Rodriguez. Grew up in Arizona. She's spent her whole life in intense sun. If anyone can handle this test, it's her." Sam was already pulling up personnel files. "We should also include Dr. Kevin Walsh himself. He's worked in tropical medicine and has spent years in high UV environments. And maybe engineer Sophie Turner. She's from Australia and worked on solar installations before joining the fleet." Jake reviewed the files Sam was showing him. Each person had extensive experience with sun exposure that would be lethal to the Valorans. "What about equipment? What would we need to bring?" "That's the beautiful part," Dr. Walsh said with a grin. "We don't need anything special. Basic sun protection like we'd use for a day at the beach. Sunscreen, water, maybe some sunglasses." "The Valorans won't believe it," Ben said. "They'll think we're using some kind of advanced technology." "Let them think that at first," Jake replied. "The shock value alone might give us an advantage in future negotiations." Over the next few hours, Jake's team worked out the details of their plan. They would accept the Valoran challenge, but instead of bringing massive protective equipment like the aliens expected, they would demonstrate humanity's natural resistance to stellar radiation. The response from Earth Command came, faster than expected. Admiral Carl Murphy's message was brief but supportive. "Captain Morrison, Earth Command has reviewed your situation. We're authorizing you to accept the Valoran trial. Show them what humans are capable of. Good luck." Jake gathered his volunteers. In the briefing room, Sergeant Rodriguez was a tough woman in her 30s who had served in desert operations around the world before joining the space fleet. Dr. Walsh was an experienced physician who had worked in Africa and South America. Engineer Turner was a cheerful woman from Queensland who joked that she had been preparing for this test her whole life. "I want everyone to understand what we're doing here," Jake told them. "This isn't just about passing their test. This is about showing the galaxy that humanity deserves respect." "Captain," Sergeant Rodriguez said, "I've spent weeks in the Sahara Desert with nothing but a hat and water bottle. 6 hours of sun exposure doesn't scare me." Engineer Turner laughed. "Where I grew up, 6 hours in the sun was called Tuesday. My biggest concern is getting bored." Dr. Walsh was more serious. "I've studied the medical effects of UV exposure extensively. With proper hydration and basic skin protection, a healthy human can handle far more radiation than these aliens think is possible." Jake felt proud of his team. "The Valorans are expecting us to show up with massive protective equipment and advanced technology. Instead, we're going to walk out there like we're going to the beach." The next morning, Jake sent a message to Ambassador Zarhai accepting the challenge. The response came quickly, and Jake could hear surprise in the alien's musical voice. "Captain Morrison, we must ask again if you truly understand what you are accepting. The solar endurance has never been survived by any biological life form." "We understand, Ambassador. Humanity accepts your challenge." There was a long pause before the Valoran responded. "Very well. We will prepare the testing site on the surface of Moon designated Kepler 442d. The trial will take place in 3 days." After the transmission ended, Sam looked worried. "Captain, what if we're wrong about this? What if human resistance to radiation isn't as strong as we think?" Jake had wondered the same thing, but looking at his volunteers, he felt confident. "Sam, humans have been living under stars for thousands of years. We've climbed mountains, crossed deserts, and sailed oceans all under direct sunlight. If we can't handle 6 hours of sun exposure, then we don't deserve to be in space." Ben nodded approvingly. "Besides, the alternative is becoming their slaves. I'd rather die fighting than live on my knees." Dr. Walsh was reviewing medical supplies. "I'll bring basic first aid equipment, but honestly, the biggest risk is probably dehydration or boredom. The radiation levels they're talking about are intense, but not beyond human tolerance." Jake looked out at the stars through the conference room window. In 3 days, everything would change. Either humanity would earn its place as an equal among the stars, or they would die trying. But for the first time since meeting the Valorans, Jake was genuinely excited about their chances. The day of the trial arrived with clear skies on the small moon's surface. Jake stood in the shuttle bay of the Starbound, watching his team make final preparations. The contrast between the human and Valoran preparations was striking. While the aliens had spent 2 days setting up massive protective shields and medical equipment on the moon's surface, the humans were packing like they were going on a picnic. Sergeant Rodriguez checked her water bottle and adjusted her sunglasses. She wore a standard military uniform with short sleeves, something that would have horrified the Valorans if they understood how little protection it offered. "Ready when you are, Captain." Dr. Walsh packed a small medical kit with basic supplies and a bottle of sunscreen. "I brought SPF 30, he said with a smile. "Should be more than enough for 6 hours." Engineer Turner was the most relaxed of all. She had tied her hair back and was wearing what looked like regular work clothes. "Back home, we'd call this a mild day. The UV index is actually lower than a typical summer afternoon in Brisbane." Jake felt a mixture of pride and nervousness as he looked at his volunteers. In a few hours, they would either make history or become part of it in the worst possible way. The shuttle ride to the moon's surface was quiet. Through the windows, they could see the Valoran ship in orbit, bristling with sensors and protective equipment. Commander Rick Hayes, their pilot, had spent the morning joking about how the aliens had brought enough medical equipment to supply a small hospital. "Landing in 2 minutes," Rick announced. "The test site is directly ahead." Jake could see the platform the Valorans had constructed. It was a flat metal surface about 50 meters square, positioned to receive direct sunlight from the system's star. Around the platform, the aliens had set up their elaborate protective systems. Energy shields, environmental controls, and what looked like emergency medical stations were arranged in a careful circle. The Valoran delegation was waiting at a safe distance, all of them inside sealed environmental suits despite being in the shade. Ambassador Zarhai's voice came through the communication system as their shuttle landed. "Captain Morrison, our instruments confirm that radiation levels on the platform are at lethal intensity. We must ask one final time if you wish to reconsider." Jake activated his communicator. "Thank you for your concern, Ambassador. We're ready to proceed." As the shuttle door opened, Jake could feel the warmth of the star on his face. It was bright and hot, but not unbearably so. He had experienced worse during summer training exercises on Earth. The human team walked calmly toward the test platform. Jake noticed that several Valoran scientists were frantically checking their instruments. Through his earpiece, he could hear fragments of their translated conversations. Readings confirm lethal radiation levels. How are they walking without protection? Check the instruments again. Jake and his team stepped onto the metal platform. The surface was warm under their feet, and the direct starlight was intense but manageable. Jake removed his jacket and rolled up his sleeves, partly to stay cool, and partly to show the watching aliens that he wasn't hiding any protective equipment. Sergeant Rodriguez found a comfortable spot and sat down cross-legged. The sunlight didn't seem to bother her at all. "This reminds me of training exercises in Nevada," she said casually. Dr. Walsh took out a small handheld scanner and began taking readings. Radiation levels are elevated but well within human tolerance. UV index is about what you'd expect on a mountain peak. Engineer Turner actually lay down on her back, using her jacket as a pillow. "Anyone else finding this relaxing?" "The warmth feels good after weeks in the ship's recycled air." Through the communication system, Jake could hear increasingly frantic conversations among the Valoran scientists. Their instruments were telling them that the humans should be dead within minutes, but they were clearly healthy and comfortable. "Ambassador," Jake called out, "how long has it been?" 37 minutes, came the stunned reply. "This should not be possible." As the first hour passed, something remarkable began to happen. The human's skin started to darken slightly as their bodies naturally adapted to the increased UV exposure. Sergeant Rodriguez's arms, already tanned from years in the desert, became noticeably darker. "Captain," Dr. Walsh announced, "my scanner is showing increased melanin production in all team members. This is a normal adaptive response to sun exposure." The effect was visible to the naked eye. The Valoran scientists became increasingly agitated as they watched the humans not only survive what should have been lethal radiation, but actually adapt to it in real time. High Researcher Morin's voice came over the communication system, barely audible through her translator. "Impossible. Their cellular structure is changing. How is this possible?" "It's called getting a tan," Engineer Turner replied cheerfully. "Pretty standard for humans." By the third hour, the human team had settled into a comfortable routine. Sergeant Rodriguez was doing stretching exercises. Dr. Walsh continued taking scientific readings. Engineer Turner had started a card game with Jake. They looked like tourists enjoying a day at the beach rather than test subjects enduring lethal radiation. The Valorans, meanwhile, were in chaos. Their medical equipment was prepared for treating radiation poisoning, but there were no patients. Their sensors confirmed deadly radiation levels, but the humans showed no signs of distress. "Captain," Ambassador Zarhai's voice carried a tone Jake had never heard before, something between awe and fear. "Our instruments indicate you have been exposed to enough radiation to kill most life forms 10 times over. Yet you show no signs of cellular damage." "That's because we're not most life forms," Jake replied. "We're humans." As the fourth and fifth hours passed, the humans actually seemed to be enjoying themselves more. The initial intensity of the direct starlight had become comfortable warmth. Dr. Walsh noted that their bodies were producing vitamin D at accelerated rates, something that would actually improve their health. 1 hour remaining, announced General Koldai, his voice filled with disbelief. Jake looked at his team. Sergeant Rodriguez was doing push-ups. Dr. Walsh was taking notes for what he said would be the most important medical paper of his career. Engineer Turner was humming quietly to herself as she worked on a crossword puzzle. None of them looked like they were enduring a trial. They looked like they were having a pleasant afternoon in the sun. Through his earpiece, Jake could hear the Valoran scientists arguing among themselves. Words like impossible and unprecedented kept coming through the translation. Their entire understanding of biological life was being challenged by 4 humans who were treating lethal radiation like a warm bath. 30 minutes remaining, came the announcement. Jake stood up and stretched, looking directly at the Valoran delegation. Even through their protective suits and environmental shields, he could see their shock. Their whole civilization was built around avoiding what humans considered a pleasant day outside. For the first time in 10,000 years, the Valorans were witnessing something they had never imagined possible. The humans weren't just surviving the solar endurance trial, they were thriving in it. The final minutes of the 6-hour trial felt different than the rest. Jake could sense the tension from the Valoran delegation even across the distance that separated them. Their instruments had been screaming warnings for hours, yet the humans remained not just alive but healthy and relaxed. Time remaining, 10 minutes, announced General Koldai, his voice barely steady. Sergeant Rodriguez was doing jumping jacks to stay loose after sitting for so long. Her skin had developed a healthy tan that would have been impossible for most species to achieve without dying first. Anyone else getting hungry? All this fresh air is giving me an appetite. Dr. Walsh laughed as he packed up his medical equipment. I've got enough data here to revolutionize galactic biology. The Valorans are going to want to study us for years. Engineer Turner stood up and dusted off her clothes. The sunlight had given her face a warm glow that made her look healthier than when they started. That was actually quite nice. We should do this more often. Jake felt a surge of pride as he looked at his team. They had just accomplished something that 10,000 years of galactic civilization said was impossible. And they had done it so casually that it looked easy. Time, came Ambassador Zarhai's voice, barely a whisper. The platform fell silent except for the distant hum of Valoran equipment. Jake could see the alien delegation huddled around their instruments, their body language suggesting heated discussion. Finally, Ambassador Zarhai's voice returned to the communication channel. Captain Morrison, in 10,000 years of galactic history, no species has ever completed the solar endurance trial. You and your team have just done so while showing no signs of distress or cellular damage. This changes everything. Jake stepped forward on the platform. Ambassador, with respect, this doesn't change anything for us. Humans have been doing this for thousands of years. We just call it going outside. The silence that followed lasted so long that Jake wondered if their communication system had failed. When Ambassador Zarhai finally spoke again, his voice carried a tone Jake had never heard from any Valoran. Captain, we request permission to return to our ships and consult with our government. What we have witnessed today requires immediate discussion at the highest levels of our empire. Of course, Ambassador. We'll be here when you're ready to continue our talks. As the human team returned to their shuttle, Jake could see frantic activity around the Valoran ship. Lights flashed, communication arrays extended, and their vessel seemed to pulse with energy as messages were sent across space at impossible speeds. Back aboard the Starbound, word of their success spread quickly through the ship. The mess hall erupted in cheers when Jake and his team entered. Crew members who had been worried about becoming slaves to an alien empire now talked excitedly about humanity's new status in the galaxy. Captain, Sam Parker said as she approached with a datapad full of sensor readings, I've been monitoring Valoran communications. They're sending priority messages to every part of their empire. The words unprecedented and impossible keep coming up in the translations. Dr. Walsh was already at work writing his report. Jake, do you realize what we've just proven? For the first time in galactic history, a species has demonstrated that biological adaptation can surpass technological protection. We've turned their entire worldview upside down. 3 days passed before the Valorans requested another meeting. When Ambassador Zarhai appeared on the main screen, he looked different. The arrogance and condescension were gone. replaced by something that looked almost like respect. Captain Morrison, I bring greetings from the Velarin High Council. Your species has accomplished something that our greatest scientists believed was biologically impossible. We formally invite humanity to join the Valoran Empire not as a protected species, but as equals. Jake had been preparing for this moment. We're honored by your offer, Ambassador, but we have some conditions of our own. The ambassador's glowing eyes brightened with what might have been surprise. Please state your terms. First, we want full partnership, not membership. Humanity will work with the Valoran Empire, but we won't be ruled by it. Second, we want to help evaluate other species for inclusion. We think your current testing methods might be missing some important qualities. Ambassador Zarhai was quiet for a long moment. Your proposals are acceptable. In fact, they are welcome. The High Council has realized that our methods may have been too narrow. Perhaps other species have valuable traits that we failed to recognize. High Researcher Maureen appeared beside the ambassador. Captain, we would like permission to study human biology. Not as test subjects, but as partners in research. Your natural resistance to stellar radiation could help us develop better protection for our own people. We'd be happy to help, Dr. Walsh replied, but we'd also like to learn about your technology. I think both our species could benefit from sharing knowledge. General Coldeye joined the conversation. There are other empires in this galaxy, Captain. Some are not as reasonable as we have become. Your species may face challenges that require both biological resilience and technological advancement. Jake nodded. Then it's good that we'll be working together. Over the following weeks, the relationship between humans and Valorans developed rapidly. Joint research stations were established. Valoran scientists worked with human biologists to understand adaptation and resilience. Human engineers learned about advanced environmental controls and life support systems. But the most important change was in how both species viewed the galaxy. The Valorans began reaching out to species they had previously dismissed, looking for unique qualities they might have missed. Humans learned that the universe was far more complex and dangerous than they had imagined. Captain Jake Morrison found himself appointed as humanity's first galactic ambassador. As he stood on the bridge of the Starbound, now leading a small fleet of both human and Velaran ships, he reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. Captain, Sam Parker announced from her station, we're receiving a transmission from the Andretti system. Another species wants to meet with us. They say they heard about the solar endurance trial and want to know if the stories are true. Jake smiled. Tell them we'll be happy to meet. And Sam, make sure they know to bring sunscreen. The Starbound turned toward the distant system, carrying with it a new understanding of what it meant to be strong in a vast and challenging universe. The sunlight that had been humanity's constant companion since the beginning was now their key to the stars. Behind them, the Valoran ships followed, their crews learning that sometimes the greatest strength came not from avoiding challenges, but from adapting to them. For the first time in 10,000 years, the galaxy was about to discover what happened when biological resilience met technological advancement. The age of human expansion had begun, and it would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen.